Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I work for a document destruction company in Baltimore. It's not exciting work. Denton Document Services handles contracts for various government agencies, taking possession of classified files that have been approved for disposal and feeding them into industrial shredders. Boxes come in, confetti comes out, and whatever secrets those pages held disappear forever. My name is Cormac Gallagher. I'm 39 years old, and I've been doing this job for almost a decade. The pay is decent, the hours are predictable, and I don't have to think too hard about what I'm doing. That last part used to be a selling point. We're not supposed to read the files. That's made very clear during training and reinforced through regular reminders. The documents are classified, and even though they've been approved for destruction, the information in them is still protected. Reading them is a federal offense. Most people follow that rule. I usually did too. 3 weeks ago, I found a file that changed everything. The classification headers didn't match any system I'd ever seen. The agencies referenced didn't exist. The dates were wrong, describing events that never happened in a history I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a hoax, some kind of elaborate prank, maybe a test to see if employees were following the rules about not reading materials. Then I read the whole thing. The file isn't from a foreign government. It isn't from the past or some alternate future. It's from a version of Earth that isn't ours, a parallel reality that used to be filled with people just like us. I say used to be because according to the file, that Earth is empty now, and what emptied it is here too. The box came in with a shipment from one of our regular government clients. It was labeled like all the others, with routing numbers and agency codes printed on standard forms. Nothing about it looked unusual from the outside, just another box of secrets waiting to become confetti. But when I opened it, something felt wrong. The agency code didn't match anything in our system. I've processed thousands of boxes over the years, and I've developed an instinct for the standard classifications. This one was different. The format was slightly off, the numbers arranged in a pattern I didn't recognize. The agency listed on the manifest was the Federal Bureau of Parallel Studies. I'd never heard of it. When I searched for it later, on government databases and through public records, I found nothing. No mention of it anywhere. As far as I could tell, it didn't exist. Inside the box was a single file, thick, maybe 200 pages, bound together with heavy clips. The cover page was stamped with classification warnings I didn't recognize, in a format that looked official but didn't match any security protocol I knew. The header read, "Project Threshold, Final Report for Immediate Action." I should have put it in the shredder. Instead, I took it to a corner of the warehouse where I wouldn't be seen, sat down on a stack of pallets, and started reading. The first few pages were exactly what you'd expect from a government report. Bureaucratic language, organizational charts, mission statements, a description of an investigation team being assembled, scientists and military personnel and intelligence officers assigned to study something called overlap zones. It was dry, clinical, professional. The kind of writing that puts you to sleep if you're not paying attention. But the details were wrong. The report referenced a president named Whitmore who supposedly served in the 1990s. We never had a President Whitmore. It mentioned a city called New Covington on the eastern seaboard, a major metropolitan area with a population of 3 million. No such city exists in our world. The Cold War ended differently in their history. Their space program achieved things ours never did. Small details, scattered through the bureaucratic language, that painted a picture of a world almost identical to ours, but not quite right. By the time I finished the first section, my hands were shaking. The file described an Earth that was almost a mirror image of our own. Same continents, same countries, same basic arc of human civilization. You could have lived your whole life there without noticing anything was different. The variations were subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. Different election outcomes here and there, cities that developed in slightly different locations, cultural moments that happened a year earlier or later than they did here. The kind of small divergences that accumulate over time, creating a world that rhymes with ours without being identical. But the file wasn't about those differences. It was about something far more disturbing. In 1987, scientists at their version of Los Alamos detected an anomaly. Locations where the fabric of reality seemed thin, where the barriers separating parallel worlds had worn down to almost nothing. They called these locations overlap zones. At first, it was purely theoretical. Mathematical models that suggested the possibility of parallel realities existing alongside our own, separated by barriers that were usually impenetrable, but occasionally weakened. Then they developed instruments that could detect the weak points, measure them, map them. There were dozens of overlap zones scattered across their world, maybe hundreds, places where their Earth almost touched other versions of itself. And in every single one, people reported the same experiences, the feeling of being watched by something they couldn't see, episodes of missing time, hours or days that vanished from memory, dreams of places they'd never been, memories that didn't belong to them, and disappearances, people who walked into overlap zones and never came back, or worse, people who came back different. Project Threshold was their government's response to the discovery. Teams of scientists and military personnel were assigned to study the overlap zones to understand what was happening and whether it posed a threat to national security. The file I found was their final report, a comprehensive summary of everything they'd learned. I read every page. Transcripts of interviews with witnesses, field reports from research teams, scientific analyses that I only half understood. The deeper I got into the file, the more disturbed I became. The witnesses who lived near overlap zones all described similar experiences. One man reported seeing himself walking down the street, but wearing clothes he didn't own, moving in a way that didn't match his own gait. When he tried to approach, the other version of himself turned a corner and vanished. A woman described hearing her own voice coming from another room in her house, having a conversation she wasn't part of. When she went to investigate, the room was empty, but she could smell perfume she didn't own, lingering in the air. Another witness woke up one morning in a house that was almost his. Same address, same layout, same furniture arrangement. But But the photographs on the walls showed a family he didn't recognize, children he'd never had, a wife who wasn't the woman he'd married. He spent hours wandering through rooms filled with evidence of a life he'd never lived, touching objects that belonged to a version of himself he'd never met. By morning, he was back in his own reality, in his own house, with his own photographs on the walls. But he could never forget what he'd seen on the other side. The research teams discovered that the overlap zones were growing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely expanding. New tiers appearing in locations that had previously been stable. Existing zones getting wider, their boundaries pushing outward year by year. Something was weakening the barriers between realities. And the more they studied, the more they realized that the tiers weren't natural phenomena. They weren't random fluctuations in the fabric of existence. They were being made deliberately from the outside. The file calls them residents. They exist in the space between parallel realities, in the void that separates one version of Earth from another. The researchers couldn't determine exactly what they were, couldn't fit them into any existing scientific or theological framework. They're not from any single reality. They don't have physical form the way we understand it. They exist in the gaps, in the nothing between worlds, experiencing all versions of existence simultaneously. To them, every parallel Earth is like a room in an infinite house, and they've spent countless ages trying to open doors. The overlap zones are the places where they've managed to weaken the walls. The researchers developed theories about what the residents wanted, why they were so persistent in their attempts to breach the barriers between worlds. The evidence pointed to one terrifying conclusion. The residents feed on consciousness, not bodies, not energy in any physical sense, awareness itself, the spark of sentience that separates thinking beings from inanimate matter. Every conscious mind in every reality is visible to them, like lights glowing in an infinite darkness, beacons that draw their attention, that trigger their hunger. The overlap zones are places where they've managed to reach through and touch those lights. The people who disappear in overlap zones don't die, not exactly. They're taken. Their consciousness absorbed by something that exists outside of any single reality. Their awareness consumed, added to something vast and incomprehensible that dwells in the spaces between worlds. The file included historical analysis, suggesting the residents have always been there. Every culture has stories of people who vanished without explanation, entire civilizations that disappeared overnight, leaving behind empty cities and unanswered questions, ships found floating with no crew aboard, villages discovered abandoned with meals still sitting on tables. The researchers believed these were all the same phenomenon, moments throughout history when the residents broke through long enough to feed. But something has changed in recent decades. The overlap zones are appearing faster than ever before, growing larger, more people experiencing the warning signs. The researchers believed humanity itself was the cause. More humans means more consciousness, more lights in the darkness. The global population has exploded in the past century. Billions of minds generating billions of beacons. The residents are drawn to that concentration of awareness like moths to flame. And as humanity grows, as consciousness multiplies Across our crowded world, the feeding frenzy intensifies. They're not just taking individuals anymore. They're preparing to harvest. The final section of the file is the most disturbing thing I've ever read. Project Threshold didn't just document the phenomenon. They tried to stop it. Research teams were sent into overlap zones with experimental equipment designed to seal the tears, to reinforce the barriers that the residents were working to break down. They developed theories about how to push back against whatever was trying to get through. It didn't work. Worse than that, it drew attention. For the first time, the residents seemed aware that humanity was fighting back, that the lights in the darkness were doing something other than waiting to be consumed. The file describes what happened next in clinical, horrified language. Overlap zones began appearing in populated areas. Cities that had been completely stable suddenly developed tears in their centers. The zones spread faster than anyone had predicted, merging and growing and consuming entire neighborhoods. Mass disappearances followed. Thousands of people gone in single nights. No bodies, no evidence of violence, just empty streets and abandoned vehicles and homes left as though their occupants had simply stepped outside for a moment and never returned. The file I found is Project Threshold's final report. It was written as their world collapsed around them. The author describes overlap zones spreading across continents, merging into vast regions where reality itself had become unstable. The residents weren't just feeding anymore. They were harvesting, systematically moving through population centers, taking everyone. The report was written as a warning. Their scientists had discovered that certain objects could be pushed through overlap zones into other realities. Small items, documents, things that could carry information across the barriers that separated parallel Earths. This file was meant to reach another world, to warn them. The final pages are a desperate plea from people who knew they were already lost. Do not study the overlap zones. Do not try to seal them. Do not let the residents know you're aware of them. They've been feeding quietly for millennia, the author writes, taking a few here and there, enough to sustain themselves without depleting the food supply. Humanity never noticed because the losses were small enough to attribute to other causes: runaways, accidents, crimes without solutions. It's only when humanity noticed, when humanity tried to fight back, that the residents began consuming worlds, wholesale. The quiet feeding became an extinction event. The parallel Earth that wrote this file is gone now, emptied. 8 billion people reduced to silence. An entire reality's worth of consciousness consumed by something that exists outside of existence itself. The author doesn't know if the warning will reach anyone, doesn't know if any other Earth is close enough to receive it, or if the barriers will allow the file to pass through. But they had to try. Someone had to know what was coming. I finished reading the file and sat in the warehouse for a long time, trying to remember how to breathe. I wanted to believe it was fiction, an elaborate creative writing project that somehow ended up in a classified destruction shipment, a prank or a test or a delusion put to paper by someone with too much imagination and too much access to official letterhead. But the detail was too precise, the bureaucratic language too authentic, the slow accumulation of horror too methodical. too carefully documented, too consistent with how governments actually write about things they don't understand. And it explained too many things. Since reading the file, I've been paying attention to the world in ways I never did before. People vanish all the time. We accept it as a fact of life. Runaways, kidnappings, accidents in remote areas where bodies are never found. Hundreds of thousands of missing persons cases every year, most of them never resolved. We don't connect them. We don't see the pattern. Each disappearance is treated as an isolated incident, a personal tragedy without broader implications. But what if they're all the same thing? What if the overlap zones exist in our world too, and we just don't call them that? There are places that feel wrong. Everyone knows a spot like that, a stretch of road where accidents happen too frequently, a building that no one wants to enter after dark, a patch of woods that hunters avoid without being able to explain why. We rationalize it. Bad luck, creepy atmosphere, overactive imagination. But what if those places are tiers in reality? Spots where the residents can reach through and take what they want. I've started noticing things myself. Moments when the world seems to flicker, like a television signal briefly losing coherence. Nothing dramatic, just a split-second stutter in reality that's gone before I can be sure I saw it. I've seen myself in reflections, in store windows, in mirrors, in the dark screen of my phone before it lights up. A version of me that doesn't move quite right, that turns a fraction of a second too late, or blinks when I didn't blink, or wears an expression I don't remember making. I have dreams now of lives I never lived, memories that don't belong to me, of places I've never been and people I've never met. I wake up confused about which version of my life is real, and the feeling of being watched has become constant. Not from any direction I can identify, not from behind or above or any physical location, from somewhere else, somewhere outside the reality I can perceive, something vast and patient and hungry, aware of me in ways I can't understand. I don't know if reading the file made me aware of things that were always happening, or if awareness itself has made me visible to something that might otherwise have overlooked me. Either way, I don't think I have much time. I've spent 3 weeks trying to decide what to do with this information. The obvious choice would be to destroy the file like I was supposed to. Feed it into the shredder, let it become confetti, pretend I never read it. Go back to my normal life and try to forget everything I learned. But the knowledge is already in my head. I can't unread what I read. Destroying the file won't make me unaware. I thought about going public, taking the file to journalists or scientists or government agencies, trying to warn people about what's really happening, letting the world know that the disappearances aren't random, that something is feeding on us, that we're all in danger. But the file itself warns against exactly that. The parallel Earth that wrote it made that mistake. They studied the overlap zones. They tried to understand what was happening. They attempted to fight back, and the residents noticed. The quiet feeding became wholesale slaughter. An entire world emptied because humanity drew too much attention to itself. Is that what I'd be doing by sharing this? Painting a target on our entire reality? The math is horrifying when you think about it. Millions of people disappear every year. We absorb those losses without really noticing them. We call them statistics and move on with our lives. It's terrible, but it's survivable. Humanity continues, despite the quiet harvest. But if the residents escalate, if they decide to stop feeding carefully and start consuming everything at once, there would be nothing left. 8 billion people on our Earth, every single one of them taken. Millions is better than billions. A slow harvest is better than extinction. Is that the choice? Accept the quiet horror to avoid the catastrophic one? Stay silent and let people keep disappearing, because the alternative is so much worse. I don't know the right answer. I'm not sure there is one. I've decided to share what I know. Not widely, not publicly, just here, in this account that might be read by a few people or might disappear into the noise of the internet without making any impact at all. Maybe that's cowardice. Maybe I should be shouting this from rooftops, demanding that the world pay attention. But I've read what happened to the other Earth. I know what drawing too much attention can cost. So I'm threading the needle, putting the information out there for anyone who might need it, while hoping it stays small enough not to trigger a response. If you're reading this, you know what I know now. That might make you a target. I'm sorry for that. I really am. But I couldn't carry this alone anymore. Someone else had to understand. Maybe you'll dismiss this as fiction. Maybe you'll close this page and forget about it within an hour. That might be the safest thing you could do. But if any of this resonates with you, if you've experienced things that suddenly make more sense in light of what I've described, then you need to know the truth. The overlap zones are real. They exist in our world, scattered across every continent, in cities and wilderness and ordinary suburban neighborhoods. Places where the barrier between realities has worn thin, where something can reach through from the space between worlds. If you've ever felt like you were being watched from somewhere you couldn't see, you've sensed them. If you've experienced missing time, hours you can't account for, gaps in your memory that don't make sense, you've brushed against an overlap zone. If you've seen something wrong in your reflection, a version of yourself that didn't move quite right, you've glimpsed what exists on the other side. The residents are there, in the gaps between what's real. They've always been there, feeding quietly, taking just enough to sustain themselves without depleting the supply. And they're getting hungrier. I don't know how much time I have left. The flickering moments are getting more frequent. The sense of being watched has become so constant that I've almost stopped noticing it, the way you stopped noticing a sound that never stops. I see myself sometimes, in windows and mirrors and dark screens, a version that doesn't move when I move, that watches me with an expression I can't read. I think that's how it starts. The overlap getting closer. The barrier between me and whatever waits in the space between realities, wearing down to nothing. One day soon, I'll step into a room and find myself in a house that's almost mine, but not quite. Or I'll wake up and the world will have shifted just enough that I know I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And then the residents will be there in the space I've fallen into, waiting for the light that's been calling to them since before I was born. I hope I'm wrong about all of this. I hope the file was fiction, an elaborate hoax that I have let consume my mind. I hope the things I've been seeing are stress hallucinations, the product of too many sleepless nights and an overactive imagination. But I don't think I'm wrong. The file came from a dead world, a warning sent across the void between realities by people who knew they were already lost. They pushed it through the overlap zones, hoping it would reach someone who might still have a chance. It reached me. Maybe it's too late for us too. Maybe the harvest is already beginning, the quiet feeding accelerating into something that will empty our world the way it emptied theirs. Or maybe, if we're careful, if we don't investigate too closely, if we don't try to fight back, we can survive. The residents will keep feeding, keep taking their millions every year, but humanity will continue. A quiet horror instead of extinction. That's the best I can hope for now. That's the best any of us can hope for. The spaces between realities are full of hungry things, and they've always known we were here. All we can do is try not to draw their attention and pray that the lights we carry aren't bright enough to matter.